looking at the way these players are holding their cards, I imagine Michael has won the roll and is elected to go first. He's also then declared that he's actually going into main phase 1. So he did in fact win the roll and is going first with Swordsoul. You know, Swordsoul notoriously is a deck that actually plays really well going first and going second. The cards like Vishuda and the entirety of the Tenyi package work incredibly well heading into a board, but you also have this flexibility here where he's able to open Longyan, discarding Vishuda, and establish a pretty good field going first as well.
So Longyan's effect will give him a level 4 token that is also a tuner, so he can now synchro summon a level 10 monster.
Activate Longyan, take 1200.
He goes for Longyan.
Using Longyan to make Longyan.
That is the Swordsoul Signature Sovereign. Quicksing Longyan.
And he now follows that up with a normal summon of Moye. So if this goes uninterrupted, which may be wishful thinking, but if it goes uninterrupted, this is sort of your classic draw 2 combo. Well, speaking of interruptions.
Kenny goes for Nibiru, the Primal Being. Brutal. He clears the field and replaces all of the monsters with a token for Michael. A lot of times in Master Duel, the play to make, if you open with both Moyi and Longyan, is to use Longyan to summon the token and then make Baron de Fleur as insurance against that Nibiru. But since he went for the Quicksing Longyan instead, he was vulnerable to it.
So that's definitely the safer play. The high upside play is the one that we just saw. Had that resolved, he would have been able to search off of Swordsoul Grandmaster and also get 2 draws. Unfortunately for Michael, that obviously was not the case. Nibiru, a card that we've been talking about this weekend in terms of determining how popular it's going to be, has kind of been in and out of the format. We see, nevertheless, though, that unfortunately for Michael, Kenny did in fact have Nibiru.
Looks like Kenny is actually playing a Spright deck. We might have some incorrect information here, but he's going to normal summon red, special summon blue, use its effect to search for a Spright monster, and then special summon Spright Jet. So Jet's effect will give him a Spright spell or trap.
Just reverse Labyrinth, reverse Spright.
And he searches a copy of Spright Smashers. So with Nibiru on the opening turn, this really gives him just total flexibility here. Michael passing with no other additional plays. I imagine Kenny can try and put together a combination of cards that could actually deal pretty close to 8,000 damage if he really thinks about it.
Yeah, I think that Nibiru really just did him in from the very start, which is really bad luck, I think, for Michael, because I don't think Nibiru is particularly popular as a main deck option this weekend, even though it is a pretty strong card against Kashtira.
It's one of those things at the beginning of the format, sometimes players just want to hedge against the likelihood that there's a combo-centric deck that they're unaware of. You know, we've seen in previous formats where those really combo-centric decks, some of the older adventure decks have come to mind that really utilized many normal summons and many special summons on that opening turn, and as a result, some players might look at a card like Nibiru and say, I just want to be safe heading into this event and incorporate it in my deck. Yeah, so it's really, you know, one of the deck-building decision points that a lot of players had to decide.
So Kenny does link summon the Spright Sprint, uses effect to send an Angler from his deck to the grave, which lets him special summon 2 more nimble monsters, which are the 2 beavers, and then he uses a beaver and the Sprind to Xyz summon Gigantic Spright, which is a unique Xyz monster that can use link 2 monsters as Xyz materials. So since it does have a link monster under it, it does have 3,200 attack points. He used its effect to special summon, I'm not sure what that monster is actually, that he special summoned from his deck.
It's Soul Sweeper.
Yeah, the Xyz monster. What was the monster he special summoned with Gigantic?
Oh, with the Gigantic? It looked like you summoned just a Spright Jet with the Gigantic.
Oh, so just another Jet. Oh, it didn't matter because he was able to finish Michael off right there.
I got game 1.
By going into Nibiru, he just basically removes the token, and because he has Nibiru himself, he has well over 8,000 damage on the field. So this game really focuses in on the fact that, unfortunately for Michael, Kenny had a copy of Nibiru in his opening hand. You know, it's one of those things that if you play a deck like Swordsoul, you do have to make that decision point that you referenced earlier about whether or not you want to go into Baron de Fleur and have protection against Nibiru, or whether or not you're willing to go for the higher upside play. You know, with a deck like Swordsoul, which I think some people considered heading into this event, but we've now only seen it now one time throughout the entire tournament, it's probably been one of those weekends where Michael's been going for that higher upside play, and it's been working out more often than not. So heading here into side decking, we're looking at Kenny, who is in fact on Spright. We were mistaken a little bit earlier, but he's playing, you know, a Spright strategy that we actually did see yesterday. It's the Spright strategy that has the Nimble package, it has the Spright package, but it's also incorporating a Runic package as well.
Yeah, we actually did not see any runic cards there because we didn't need to. He just used his first turn's battle phase to win the duel, and the runic cards would only have gotten in the way.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he only needed one turn, and as a result, he definitely wanted to have that battle phase. So
no doubt.
No need to activate any of the runic cards. Heading into side decking, I think Michael will still decide to go first. Knowing that his opponent is playing Nibiru is definitely going to be something that may alter the way he plays. What's really interesting about this particular deck, Swordsoul against Nibiru, is sometimes it just is correct to do the higher upside play, trying to do the Grandmaster Long play to draw 2 cards, because maybe the makeup of your hand just necessitates that, and just going into Barone to floor may not actually be enough to win under some conditions. Hopefully the previous game isn't in the back of his mind and he ends up making a suboptimal play, because I certainly know in some of the matches that I've played where Nibiru has really tilted the game, it's just in the back of your mind. It's the elephant in the room the next game, and I'm really curious to see if that dictates how Michael approaches his opening turn here, if he opens with a similar combination of cards.
Right, and I think Kenny probably will keep the Nibirus in his deck after side decking, because it is fairly good against Swordsoul, because it's unusual, I would say, for the Swordsoul player to be able to use Long Yuan first, special summon it, synchro summon a 10, then normal summon Moyi. More typically, they're using Moyi, activating its effect, special summoning a token, synchro summoning Xishao to get the Long Yuan that enables the level 10 synchro summon, which then forces 5 summons before that level 10 synchro summon, making it vulnerable to to Nibiru, even if the player were to go for Barone de Fleur as their first level 10 synchro.
Yes, you'd have to naturally draw Moye and Longyuan plus an additional worm, which this deck,
Right.
with access to cards like Emergence, does every now and again.
Right, it does happen, but Xishao is often a path there.
And one of the interesting things about such a quick game like that is it does give both Michael and Kenny the opportunity that if their match goes relatively quick, that they can start helping out their fellow teammates. But that's certainly the last thing on Michael's mind. Michael's really hoping here to draw either a better combination of cards, or a combination of cards that doesn't have to play into Nibiru, or hopefully simply that Kenny just doesn't have Nibiru. But we are ready to see what Michael can do here in Game 2 with his Swordsoul strategy. Looks like he has Longyuan again, and this is going to be that decision point. Does he go into Barone? Does he go into Longyuan? Does he have an additional normal summon? No, he's going right into his extra deck.
Yep. So he discards Adhara, which might come in handy later, and this time he will inflict the 1,200 points of damage with Longyuan's effect, and it looks like he did go for Barone de Fleur to render him immune, or able to negate the effect of Nibiru and destroy it if Kenny does in fact have it. Moyi follows up, its effect special summons a Swordsoul token, and now he can safely synchro summon a level 8 monster.
This is the exact combination of cards, minus Vishuddha versus Adhara here, but it's basically the exact same combination of cards, but the big difference here is he is going to play around Nibiru after seeing it in Kenny's main deck.
Yeah, so he draws a card for the Moyi, then it uses Xishao's effect to search his deck for a Swordsoul card. Unfortunately for Michael, it looks like in this game, where he did go for Barone de Fleur, Kenny probably does not have the Nibiru, because if he did, he'd probably have used it and forced that Barone's negation so that it couldn't negate anything on his turn.
You could potentially wait a little bit longer into the turn, because you can just use it, once you kind of allow Michael to get his search. But I can definitely see that if you have Nibiru, he probably would consider activating it just to bait that negation.
Yeah, I think I would do it before the Xishao hit the field, because otherwise... Oh, well, you couldn't. That would have been... That's the 5th summon. So, yes, you're right. Yeah, he could do it at any point. But at any point he would do it, the Barone's obviously going to negate it, so it doesn't really matter where he does it. But if he has it, I don't know that he's going to get another opportunity where Michael summons 5 monsters in this duel, so he probably would have used it to force out that negation.
Yeah, it's really great to start your turn knowing that you only have to deal with a couple pieces of interaction. Here we actually see one piece of interaction on the Barone.
Yeah, actually the 5th summon would have been the Swordsoul token off the Moyi, so he could have used it there. But like as we said, it would have been negated regardless if he in fact had the Nibiru.
Change Xishao.
So, and
the Nimble Beaver is being met by Xishao's effect. Yeah. The banish here is fairly important. He has an Adhara in the graveyard. Obviously, he doesn't have a normal token on the field right now, but it could be something that we eventually see. He searched Emergence on the previous turn, so it suggests that he might actually already have Blackout set. There is a universe where even without normal summoning another Swordsoul over the course of the next couple turns, he's actually able to put a normal onto the field by banishing the Blackout from the graveyard. So the banish that he has is really important here to negate the Nimble Beaver so that he could potentially add it back with Adhara.
Yeah, Xishao's effect once per turn negates the effect of a monster on the field. So now that its negation has been used, Baron de Fleur's negation has been used, which can only be used once while face up on the field. Oh, actually, it's negated. I assume Michael didn't negate the imperm with Baron.
Certainly not. That would play into a triple tactics card.
Yeah, I assume he did not. So it's not actually used, but it is negated. So Kenny is free to do whatever he wants, and he is able to special summon Carrot for added protection against that back row card, and Red for protection against potential monster effects that activate in Michael's hand.
Yep.
And now I see a copy of Spright Sprint hit the field.
Yeah, he deems the Carrot more valuable than the Red, so he uses the Red in the Link Summon. Obviously, I think that's obviously a good choice because we know that Michael has at least one face-down card.
And if you're playing against a Swordsoul player who elected to search Emergence over Blackout, you can probably assume that back row is Blackout.
Yes. So after Link summoning Sprin, Sprin's effect sends Angler to the grave, and then Angler can special summon 2 Nimble Beavers. Michael's in a tough spot.
It'll be really interesting to see if he responds before Gigantic gets to sort of resolve its full effect.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we'll see. Gigantic's effect is activating here. Assuming that is a blackout, I don't even know when you really activate it because could he activate it? I guess on this the effect of Sprint to force. Just there's no good time.
No, the Carrot really puts Michael in a tough position.
Yeah. So the Gigantic is going to get Spright Blue from the deck, special summon it. Blue's effect, I assume, is going to search for Spright Jet. Yeah, there's really no good time to activate that. The blackout. It's just going to get negated regardless. Kenny has plenty of monsters that he can tribute basically inconsequentially to negate the blackout. And that is, of course, assuming it is a blackout, which I think is a fair assumption.
He also just needs to negate it. He doesn't actually have to send a extra deck monster to the graveyard to destroy it. So he had that Beaver that's been floating there in defense mode the entirety of the turn, or at least at this stage of the turn.
Right.
Now, Kenny is really showing the power of Sprites. Even without Spright Elf, he is able to establish a pretty reasonable field. He has interruptions now with Spright Smashes in his hand. He showcased the ability of utilizing cards like Infinite Impermanence in this game and then Nibiru in the previous game to demonstrate that with some of those hand interruptions, this deck can still compete with the top of the field even if you don't have Spright Elf.
Yeah, so he adds Smashers to his hand, and once again, we have not yet seen a Runic card, but it looks like Kenny's doing okay.
Or Swap Frog, for that matter. He's been really just relying on Sprites and Nimbles, which have been in combination with one another now for, let's say, about 6 months.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Spright deck. Just a single card can just spiral out of control. They get so many more cards. One card gets another card gets a third card, and you sort of see how it all develops. It spits monsters onto the field, and then you use them to either negate the opponent's cards or as necessary components to activate Spright Smashers, or it just takes these summon powerful monsters.
And in some cases, just to ensure that you have a play on the turn that follows.
Yeah, so he's going back for Onibimaru. This card reminds me, every time I describe its effect, I always describe it as a Destiny Hero Doomlord.
Yes,
because that's most similar to me.
Yeah, very similar effects, and it's honestly being used for a very similar purpose as where Doomlord was originally used to take cards like Stardust Dragon off the field. We see it here lining up pretty well against the 2 synchros on Michael's side of the field.
So Onibimaru's effect will activate. He's going to get rid of Xishao's. The Gigantic Spright actually has enough attack points to destroy Baron de Fleur. Also had enough to destroy Xishao's, but I guess he would rather banish the Xishao's.
I imagine he's already done some calculations, so I'm not sure if he can actually deal 8,000 damage this turn or if he's just trying to establish the best possible field, because if he feels like this game will go long enough for the monster to actually return from the banish pile, I can definitely understand not wanting Baron to just float back to the field in a few turns.
Yeah, the Baron will probably be more problematic than the Xishao's. Should it return to the field? Okay, so Gigantic Sprite's 3,200 attack points destroys Baron de Fleur, which only has 3,000.
59? Should be 59, right?
Is it 59? Yes, my bad.
Both players using pen and paper, making sure they're very deliberate about some of the calculations, which is definitely something you always want to do.
36.
36. Yep. Go main two.
So in main phase 2, Kenny probably would like a way to protect that carrot. Otherwise,
I think
Michael may be able to just destroy it in battle and use blackout.
Draw for turn. Stand by phase.
we know he has Spright Smashes, so he's at least 1 point of interaction. It's really dependent on what Michael has here. You know, if Michael has multiple, let's say, his deck has the Tenyis, which obviously are pretty powerful, which we see here. He has plenty of monsters that he can normal summon. It really depends on how many interruptions he can play through.
So Michael special summons Zedhara since he controls no monsters, and then links it away for Monk of the Tenyi, a normal monster with 1,000 attack points.
It's interesting here. Kenny has the option of using Smashers to get that right off the field. That would potentially force out the blackout on the carrot. That probably wouldn't happen, but from Kenny's perspective, it would get the normal monster off Michael's side of the field, which would then lock the Adhara in the graveyard without a normal on the field. You know, he, as of what we currently see on the field, only has 1 point of interaction in terms of actually affecting monsters, right? Carrot is great against blackout, but in terms of the actual monsters that Michael could have, he only has that singleton smashes, so he needs to try and use that perfectly.
It is a tough decision here, because if he does choose to use it on the Monk of the Tenyi, which was link summoned by using a special summon monster, Michael is still able to normal summon. So if he has something like Moyi with a card to reveal, Kenny likely has no way to stop it. But he is going to hold off on the Smashers, which allows Michael to banish the Adhara from his graveyard, since Michael does have that normal monster on the field. And I think he brought Long Yuan back?
Yes, and he has the emergence from the turn before us, which is really tough. I feel like from Kenny's perspective, he sort of knows that he needs to hold off that carrot for the emergence. So from his perspective, he might be considering, how to navigate this. One of the things that Michael could do here is actually discard the emergence for the Long Yuan. Not something that you typically see all the time, but he does have that play available to him, but that would then play into the blackout. So it's really interesting to see how Michael tries to navigate through this, because the fact that he held the emergence, in theory is pretty good because it allows you to use the entirety of your deck on the following turn. But the fact that Kenny really, with great insight, kept that carrot on the field, it's one, playing around the blackout, but two, also playing around the emergence.
Adhara added back Long Yuan.
The Monk can destroy the carrot in battle, though, right? They both have 1,000 attack points. So Michael is able to get it off the field if he's willing to go to main phase 2.
I think that's just what Elijah, his teammate, has just mentioned. Is there any reason you can't just attack carrot?
Am I? Okay. Activate blackout.
He's activating the blackout.
And your set card.
So he's instead going to force the negation through Carrot's effect.
Yep, this is also a way of forcing out the carrot negation. Now the emergence would be free to resolve.
I guess the problem with attacking the carrot is that that would basically force Kenny to use Smashers. But then the carrot's effect would still be active. He'd still be able to use that on the emergence.
Well, if he has, as he does here, one of the new cards from Photon Hypernova, Triple Tactics Thrust, it's probably beneficial to force out that carrot negation in main phase 1 so that he can now search his deck for any normal spell or trap.
So that's the reason to not attack the carrot.
Kenny, unfortunately for Michael, has a copy of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, which will cut him off from that ability. So now he still has to worry about that Smasher set.
So he has the emergence, we know, and now we know that he can resolve that emergence.
And he has the Long Yuan.
Carrot's been used. There's already an Ash used this turn. He does have Long Yuan. So he is just going to enter his battle phase and now attack Carrot.
Main phase 2. Activate Long Yuan.
Yeah, nothing on rest.
I imagine this is going to prompt Smashers in some way, shape, or form.
Probably. I'm not entirely sure. Well, I guess he wanted to attack and then do this in main phase 2 so that Kenny couldn't banish the on-field Carrot, whose effect had already been used, and now instead would need to give up either Gigantic Spright or the Onibimaru to banish either the token or the Long Yuan.
Yeah, that's potentially true because both Soul Sweeper and Gigantic Spright are threats heading into the turn that follows.
Yeah, whereas if he had done it in main phase 1, yeah, I could definitely see this play depending on what's in Michael's hand. If he had more cards to extend his field, obviously it would have been better in main phase 1 so he can then get a battle phase, but if this is pretty much all he has, this is the time to do it. So Kenny will give up the Onibimaru, banish the token to cut Michael off from effects that require him to have a normal monster on the field.
He does get back his Grandmaster back in the end phase, right? So that's a very important effect, too, that you need to remember that with Onibimaru, you get it back during your next end phase, which we see here.
Yes, and I believe Onibimaru needs to be destroyed, right, for the banished monsters to shuffle back into the deck.
That's tight.
So since he banished it with Smashers, it stays banished until the She-Shell returns.
So we see here that Michael has a copy of Rivalry of Warlords. He's decided to activate it immediately at the beginning of Kenny's turn. That way Kenny cannot put an additional monster on the field and then have any type of option in terms of what type he wants to keep up. It looks like we're going to be locked into Worms and Thunders.
Rivalry of Warlords is a fantastic card for Swordsoul decks because they pretty much only use one type of monster.
Kenny does have some ability to go into his deck now. One of the advantages of the Sprites is that there are a few of them that are Thunders. Now, the big picture issue here is going into his extra deck. He won't be able to have quite the same degree of flexibility, but he is going to be able to search a blue out of his deck with his Gigantic Spright.
He activates the effect, and Michael's probably contemplating using She-Shell to negate.
It's definitely possible. He wants to probably keep in the back of his mind that he's going to be able to banish the Blackout from his graveyard to put a tuner on the field. So it really is a big picture issue of when he needs to time that, because if there's any risk of Grandmaster actually getting destroyed at any point in this turn, there's a fear that you leave the token on the field because you really want to have that token on the field so that you can go into your extra deck with Long on the turn that follows.
In case anyone missed it, Michael was asking his teammates for some advice on whether they think Kenny uses 2 copies of Smashers in his deck. Because he wants to know whether he needs to save the negation for a get and to get that answer to Rivalry.
He is playing 47 cards, so as an opponent who has yet to actually even see one single Runic card, you have to imagine what in the world has made his deck go all the way up to 47. A second Spright Smashers isn't out of the question. Kenny's doing what I think many players do when a card like Goes Imagine or Rivalry of Warlords is on the field, which is look at your extra deck and just reduce it down to, okay, what are my options? Let's just simplify this.
I do that all the time. Can I summon you? No. Can I summon you? No. I can summon you. You don't help. So he's got to special summon the Jet. I assume he'll activate the effect.
See, I think what he's going to do is banish, a non-blackout card. That way, on his turn, he can just use Grandmaster's effect to banish the blackout so that the token is special summoned on his turn.
That was awesome.
Okay. Oh, okay. My bad.
So looking at Kenny's extra deck, I'm not really sure what his most obvious path forward is in terms of actually finding a way to play through this rivalry.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, we saw Nightmare Phoenix in his extra deck, but he can't summon that because of the rivalry. The great irony of the extra deck monster being the answer to the trap card that stops you from playing the extra deck monster.
Ooh, look at this. We finally see a Runic card. I think that may have taken Michael by surprise.
Yeah, Runic Destruction, the perfect card for destroying the rivalry and banishing 4 cards from the top of Michael's deck.
The fact that we hadn't seen a Runic card yet in this match had made it such that I kind of forgot that was just a natural out to a card like Rivalry. I'm honestly curious if Michael knew that his opponent had the Runic cards in his deck, if he would have actually still sided in Rivalry.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's probably still worth it. The thing about Swordsoul is that the Rivalry is has such limited effect on the Swordsoul player, the Tenyi Swordsoul player, since the monsters are primarily worms, that it's probably worth it just to shut down most of the Spright players' extra deck.
I could definitely see that. Even if it doesn't stick around on the field, there are cases where it can actually, at least reduce the amount of monsters on the opponent's side of the field, forcing them to send cards to the graveyard so that they actually get down to one type. And then even if they draw destruction later on, you've at least gotten some value out of the card.
Yeah. So I assume that was in the main phase 1. So Kenny will be skipping his next battle phase.
So now what we're likely going to see here is, depending on what he draws, of course, but Michael will probably consider using his Grandmaster to negate something.
Activate Chijo.
Right, you were. Yeah, so the negation of Jet's effect is meaningless since it doesn't really have an effect right now and has an effect that activates when it's summoned, but the banishment of the Blackout lets Michael special summon a level 4 tuner. So now he can make a level 10 Synchro.
Yep, and he's also able to use all of the Tenyis in his graveyard, including Idhara. He banished the Moye on the turn previous so that he actually fueled the perfect normal summon. That was one intense game.
Yeah, so now they're 1-1, and then the match is pushing into a third and final duel for these competitors.
And we see, looking over at Table B, it looked like Elijah had won, and on Table C, it looked like their additional teammate had won, Chester. So, if Michael can win this game and one of his teammates are able to win any of the next games, their team will move on to the top 8. Not there yet, though. So heading here into Game 3, one of the most logical changes will be that Michael will probably take out Rivalry of Warlords. Usually it's not a great card going second. And in addition to that, now that he's actually seen the Runic package, there's that point that we had a moment ago where we discussed, to the extent that you would actually want that card against a deck that has Runic Destruction and can access it so easily. So I'm curious to see how he switches around his deck to accommodate for that. Yeah,
going second, I think, does come out. Going first, I'd probably keep it in, but I agree.
Other things to consider, I'm really curious if Kenny's able to establish Swap Frog on the opening turn. We haven't actually seen Totally Awesome. His deck that we talked about earlier, having so many different packages. It's really interesting to see which of those actually shine, and the fact that he doesn't need to actually see all of them is something that's pretty interesting. The ability to see the Spright cards in some games, well, probably all of the games, the Nimble in some of the games, but then the Runic and the Swap Frog engines, there are some games you haven't seen any of them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the engines are just so powerful on their own, and they don't always interact too well with the other engines, so sometimes you just need one of them.
Maybe I'll take one of these out.
Although we did see that Runic Destruction was pretty key that game.
We're going to look over here at Table B, just kind of get a look in here. I think this is the match between Elijah Green, and I'm not sure what teammate he's up against, but we're taking a look here in the middle of Table B. It looks like from what we can see here, we know Elijah's playing against Brian, and Brian is on a Labyrinth. We can actually tell that he's on Labyrinth because if you notice, Elijah is targeting the Spell and Trap zones. Not something that we've seen a lot this weekend, but if you know your opponent's not going to be filling up the monster zones, you might as well start targeting those Spell and Trap zones with the effects of Shangri-La.
Yeah, and against Labyrinth, if you could lock down all 5 Spell and Trap card zones, there's not much you can do with monsters.
No, you basically just need Lava Golem. It's really Lava Golem or bust there, and since Elijah won the first game, that could really potentially be a game breaker. Now we're taking a look over here at Table C. We see a much different circumstance here. We see Labyrinth against a Despia strategy.
Looks like Lady Labyrinth is on the field.
Yes, things are going well when Lady Labyrinth is on the field. It looks like he might potentially be resolving Terror of the Underroot. I think they're actually reading it. Yes, and it looks like he chained the effect of Lady Labyrinth and got to set, it looks like a copy of Big Welcome Labyrinth. So this is a game in a much different position. It actually looks like there's a copy of Evenly Matched in the graveyard too. So that game, even if Evenly Matched was activated, it does look like Labyrinth was able to come back a little bit, which is one of the great features of Labyrinth. The deck that, even though cards like Evenly Matched are popular in the main and side deck, we actually still see that deck able to compete.
Evenly Matched is such a brutal card when it hits. Just banishing so many of your opponent's cards face down can sometimes spell defeat for them.
Many trap strategies of the years prior would, in many ways, I'm not going to say entirely just concede the game to an Evenly Matched, but an Evenly Matched definitely was backbreaking. In some cases, the Labyrinth deck can actually come back. But with that being said, after getting a look at what's happening down the rest of the table, it is now time for us to return to our Table A and take a look here at Game 3 between Michael and Kenny.
Kenny's starting it off with Runic Slumber, and he's going to obviously special summon Hugin from the extra deck since there's no monster on the field to target with its other effect.
This is the first time that Kenny's been able to go first in this match, and it'll be very interesting to actually see which engines appear and which engines, quite frankly, just don't in his opening turn.
All right, so he'll discard the Runic Destruction to get the Fountain. If Kenny has another Runic card and is able to draw 3 cards with his Fountain, that could be big trouble for Michael.
That's really best case scenario for what Kenny is hoping for.
I don't think it's unlikely, given that he did discard a Runic spell. He summons the Nimble Beaver, uses its effect to summon a Nimble Angler from his deck. Now he has 3 level 2 monsters on the field.
Now, this is something that we've talked about in previous events, but you actually want to search out that Angler, so there are 2 additional copies of Nimble Beaver in the deck, so that if you use Sprint at any point, you can still summon 2 Nimble monsters, the 2 remaining Nimble Beavers in the main deck.
So after Xyz summoning Gigantic Spright, he uses its effect. And I think we're going to see, we're going to see Swap Frog.
Yes, it's funny. We were talking about all the different engines in Kenny's deck and how, in some games we've seen 1, 2. We may actually finally be able to see all 3 at once, Spright, Frog, and Runic.
So he activates the Runic Fountain. I wonder if he has a Spright Blue, or he just chose to forego it and to go the Swap Frog route instead. He has Jet, so the blue was not as important since he already has the Jet.
Yep, he'll be able to search out the Spright Smasher, so he'll be able to dig out that piece of interaction from his deck.
He's going to end his turn with quite a bit of interruption. And that's even without considering that he can play all of these Runic spell cards from his hand with Fountain on the field.
It's very important. We see this synergy when this deck really first became popular, but the ability to clear out the extra monster zone from Hugin and then return back into the extra monster zone by enabling a Runic card that then enables Fountain is just one of the best reasons to combine the Spright package with the Runic package.
Yeah, Kenny did use a Runic spell to summon another Hugin. And the most important part of that is he then could use the Fountain to draw 3 cards. So he is just getting card after card after card, and the plays continue. Here's the Spright Sprint that you referenced earlier. He will send Angler to the grave and get those last 2 Beavers in his deck.
And if I'm correct, I think we're going to see a card that, previously you could have played in order to summon Totally Awesome, but it's becoming a little bit more popular now that Spright Elf has been recently forbidden. Is this going to be Buijin Ashima? It is. So this is an interesting card. It's going to allow him to summon 2 Swap Frogs, 1 from his hand and 1 from his graveyard.
I guess he returned the Swap Frog to his hand with its effect earlier.
Yep, that's definitely something that happened. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to keep track of the Swap Frog effect to bounce to hand, but by bouncing 1 to the hand through Swap Frog's own effect and then having 1 in the graveyard, naturally used for material somewhere along the turn, that fulfills the requirement necessary to now go into Totally Awesome. So the only big difference here is it's going to be a single Totally Awesome as opposed to some of the previous formats where maybe you'd have 2 or 3 activations. But with this entirety of what Kenny has opened with, from the Runic Fountain to having access to Spright Smashers, now he had the blue that you referenced earlier, it doesn't seem like he's going to need much more than just 1 Totally Awesome activation.
Yeah, and between that and Smashers, and who knows how many more Runic spells he'll have to activate on Michael's turn. He probably has, I can't see exactly how many cards are in his hand, but it's probably pretty full because he keeps drawing cards and adding them to his hand. Fujinki Ahashima is being used in a Link summon with the Spright Jet. We'll see what he's summoning. He goes for Nightmare Phoenix.
That cannot be used as Link material, I do not believe, so that's something that hopefully the judges can catch. Well, with that being said, we see a Spright Carrot come down with 2 back rows, so 2 cards in the Smell and Trap card zone.
Stand by main. Carry this. Yeah.
So Michael here is just checking some of the sort of Nightmare Phoenix additional effects. As we know, the Nightmare cards have these additional effects if they are co-linked.
I don't believe there's. Yeah. So
okay.
So
luckily,
they caught your observation that the Bujin can't be used as a Link material.
I'm sorry about that.
So they're going to have to rewind this duel.
Which luckily it hasn't gone too far. We caught that almost immediately.
I'm not entirely sure actually whether that even puts Kenny in a worse position than he was in after making the play.
Yes, that's right.
What it is worth, though, is the only zone on the field that he can go into at a Link monster is the zone where Ashima is located, so he actually has to go into a different extra deck monster. So he's going to go into Soul Sweeper. That way he can actually open up the monster zone to special summon the Spright Carrot from his hand. So in the grand scheme of things, what does it change? And obviously we want a perfect game state, but in terms of the amount of interruptions that Michael will need to try and play through, it actually doesn't change it by any significant amount.
Right, the Nightmare Phoenix was pretty much irrelevant given that nothing was co-linked. Book of Eclipse. So that would send all of Kenny's monsters face down, though he does have the carrot and the toad, both of which can be used to negate it. So he does use the carrot, gets rid of the Bugin that he wasn't really doing anything with, and that was taking up one of his zones. And he does negate the Book of Eclipse.
Enter battle phase.
Yeah, well, I think I know what that means.
So that means evenly matched, but Totally Awesome can stop it unless Michael has something like Called by the Grave or another evenly to activate. Toad's effect will bring the Nimble Beaver back to his hand, and he does have another evenly matched.
Wow, you were right. So now if Kenny has to kind of accept that this evenly match is going to resolve, what is he going to keep on the field? This is a really difficult one. Maybe it could just be Fountain. That way, if he has a runic card in his hand, he has some potential point of interaction, at least maybe the ability to regain cards to his hand.
Yeah, I think if he has a runic card, it's definitely Fountain. If he doesn't, maybe it would have been the Gigantic. Since Michael's entering main phase 2.
Is that a copy of, Triple Tactics Tower?
Oh, man, this is a brutal reversal. He's using the Forceful Sanctuary effect to look at Kenny's hand.
It looks like he's shuffling away a runic card, which is very, we talked about, keeping Runic Fountain on the field, but if your opponent uses that Triple Tactics talent, maybe there's a reasonable chance where you activate it in response. But here, Michael is going to be able to play with full information. He also knows that Kenny doesn't have a battle phase because of all the runic cards he activated on the first turn. So now if Michael can combine the cards in his hand with the tie that he's searching out, he might be able to establish a field that will be very difficult for Kenny to get through with that single copy of Nimble Beaver.
Yeah, this might be tough.
Ooh, and Pot of Desires. This is, if you really put together the perfect opening hand going second, Book of Eclipse, double evenly matched, Pot of Desires, and Swordsoul Emergence.
That's pretty good go second hand.
That is pretty fantastic if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny set up a phenomenal turn 1 field. But it wasn't enough for all that.
Triple Tactics Talent, Pot of Desires. What a combination of cards.
Taya hits the field, and its effect will banish, well, as a cost, it'll banish the Emergence with it to activate its effect, get a token, and now he can make Qishao, and he will use the effect of both Taya and Qishao.
One of my favorite plays with the Swordsoul strategy is actually to do just this, but reduce the level of Taya down to level 7, then go into Yazi. Yazi is probably my favorite extra deck monster in the Swordsoul strategy, but here Michael elected just to go into Grandmaster.
Wait, hold on. Did I use anything to talents?
Yeah, you Toad negated my book, or Carrot negated my Book of Eclipse.
Okay,
Yeah.
He also toaded the evenly.
In the battle phase, though.
Oh, in the battle. You're right. You're right.
It was actually very intuitive, though, for Michael to actually declare main phase 1 when he activated Book of Eclipse.
Yes.
Now, sometimes instinctually, because you may be used to playing against Kastira, you might be utilizing your Book of Eclipse earlier, so that Shangri-La doesn't special summon from the deck during the standby phase. But it's very, very important to know that if you're actually trying to play a Triple Tactics Talent or Triple Tactics Thrust, you want to activate Book of Eclipse in main phase 1 to ensure that you meet the activation requirements.
That's a great observation.
For turn.
So Kenny's just going to draw a set and pass. If he summoned the Beaver, its effect would be negated by Qishao, so he is in trouble. That face down card is probably not a runic card, since if it were, Kenny would be able to just keep it in his hand.
So he searched Taya on the turn prior, probably trying to guarantee that he has some degree of follow-up. Sometimes if you search a card like Moya, obviously you need the additional Worm. Taya is that Swordsoul that single-handedly can put both a Synchro, or rather a tuner on the field, and then enable you to go into your extra deck.
So Kenny flips Dimensional Barrier. I assume he calls Synchros. So that stops Michael from Synchro summoning, but that was far from the top deck that Kenny needed, because all it did was take him to the next turn, if he's even fortunate enough to survive this turn.
And looking over at the table scores, we see that Chester has won at table C. So if Michael is able to take this down with Swordsoul, his team will advance into the top 8.
61.
Michael, it looks like Michael did banish the Ashuna to special summon a Vishuda in attack position just to add some damage. But Kenny is once again desperate for a good draw.
Yeah, he's putting him on what we refer to as a 2-turn clock. You have this turn, you're going to take damage, and next turn, if you can't deal with this, the game will be over. So we know that Kenny has a copy of Nimble Beaver in his hand. That's the one that we already knew.
So he's going to summon and activate the effect. Perhaps he top decked a blue, Spright Blue or Spright Jet.
Ooh, but a copy of Infinite Impermanence. The question is, oh, he extends the hand.
You guys won the match.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we won. Eli. Chester won. His I won mine.
So they're communicating,
Dude,
talking
hand
about the
game
conclusion
three
of the game.
Godly.
I think Michael is realizing what we realized here at the desk, that I don't think you could have drew up a better hand going second in Game 3 in the top 16 of the YCS.
Yeah, it would have been pretty tough to do because he had so many cards.